informed, and I'm thrilled to see that EcoSwitch. I don't hear myself. I'm thrilled to see that EcoSwitch is taking this on, because it's really it's an area where we could do with a lot more education. It's also good to be talking about solutions. I've just actually got back from a week in Rwanda at a climate conference there with climate scientists, like climate scientists. It was, I was thinking that they were going to really depress me, and there was some very depressing stuff in terms of what we're looking forward to. Thankfully, half of the things they said were so technical I couldn't understand them. So that was the only thing that really protected me from greater depression coming back there. But it was interesting, though, farming and food did come up quite a bit. It was interesting talking about the fact that sometimes increased CO2 rates lead to decreased nutrients in some crops, actually less nutrients in the actual final crop and that kind of stuff. So there's all these, fascinating to see the kind of longer term consequences that they're looking at in terms of food production and that. So food is a fascinating area. It's huge in terms of its impact. It's very difficult when it comes to behavior change, which is why I think this is fascinating to be here today and talking about this. It's a really difficult one. I think that, people are pretty pro-solar. You tell them to stop eating beef, even me, myself, and they're not necessarily as positive. So it's a really interesting area to be engaged with. And I'm thrilled again to be seeing this. The Food Switch app was something we looked to a lot when we were doing the checkout, and I'm really glad to see the George Institute moving into this area as well, because, as I said, it's a really difficult area, and I really like it when the George Institute does all the hard work for me. So just keep doing that, guys. It's really great. If I can flick you through a list of other things I want done, that'd be really good. But I'm going to hand over now to Simone Pettigrew, who's the head of food policy at the George Institute for Global Health. We're going to find out a bit more about the app, and then we're going to have some questions later. Cheers.
So much, Craig. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here with us today. Well, people are worried about the climate. We know that in Australia, the majority of people are really concerned about climate change, and we know that they're concerned about the food system as a part of the climate change equation. But what can they do about it? We know that people can't live on a sick planet. We know we have to do something at a really high level to make sure that we can actually offer people the alternatives they need to make better choices as part of the food system. Now, we were very fortunate a couple of years ago to be awarded a Centre of Research Excellence by the National Health and Medical Research Council. And our Centre of Research Excellence is called Healthy Food, Healthy People, Healthy Planet. And this is all around this idea that you really can't be healthy people unless the environment that we're living in is also healthy. Now, just a shout out, there are lots of people involved in this Centre of Research Excellence, way too many to list, and most of them are either in this room or among the 300 other people who are online. But we have 10 chief investigators, 10 associate investigators, 2 consumer representatives, and more than 10 PhD students and postdoctoral students all working on this project, and it's building up over time. We're 2 years through a 5-year grant. So some of the things that we're trying to do as part of this Centre of Research Excellence, we're looking at the nutrition side as well as the planetary health side. So we've been looking at the accuracy of nutrition labelling. We've got our Health Star rating, and it's a good tool for consumers. They can understand it, they can use it, they like it, but it can be better, and we're helping to improve it over time. So for instance, we've been doing some work looking at what happens to the algorithm of the Health Star rating if you look at added sugar, not just all sugar, and we're finding that's improving the ability of the Health Star rating to discriminate between healthier and less healthy food products. And we're also moving into ultra-processed food category to see what happens if you take that into consideration in the algorithm as well. We're also looking at improving the availability of nutrition labelling. So more and more of us are buying our food products online. And you can see here from the trajectory that this is really a thing that really kicked off with COVID. It made sure that if we weren't using online delivery beforehand, we started using it, and we can see it's an upward trajectory. It's a sign of the future. If we're going to have nutrition and planetary health ratings, we need to make sure that they are going to be effective in the online space as well. We also want to improve the salience of labelling. So we've got our Health Star rating, which is typically black and white, but they can pretty much put it where they want and how they want, and sometimes it's pretty difficult to see on packages. The work that we've been doing shows that if you put colour in it, like some of our international jurisdictions, we can really improve the performance of the Health Star rating, and we're advocating for that change to be made. And what you're all here today to learn about is that we're also developing and introducing sustainability labeling for packaged food products. And as part of that process, it's the full gamut that we just talked about for nutrition labeling. It's algorithm development. It's developing some kind of symbol that will resonate with consumers. It's making sure that this is going to be available in as many places as possible. We're longer term, also looking at developing a food packaging sustainability rating system. And I'm sure you can all think of good examples you've seen in your supermarket of way too much packaging on consumer goods. At the George Institute, we like to think about our work in terms of both upstream and downstream. And in terms of downstream, it's really important to make sure that consumers have the tools that they need to make decisions in the marketplace. We already have that with Food Switch, and we're about to have that with Eco Switch. However, it's also really important to think about the health system and what's happening at the food level in terms of the entire economy, the entire jurisdiction. So, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals number 2, it's all around hunger and ending hunger. And it acknowledges with point 2.4 that it's saying it's a system that we have to focus on and make sure that it's sustainable for long-term benefit. Just yesterday, we launched our State of the Food Supply report. And this is an example of what we're doing in the nutrition space. It's going to transfer over to what we're doing in the planetary health space. So in previous State of the Food Supply reports, for instance, we've been able to say that 2 out of 3 packaged foods has got added sugar in it. Because that information isn't available on the product, but we can deliver that information through our app. And in the most recent report, we're showing that that health star rating that we really want on all products and should be reaching about the 50% mark by now by industry's own standards, it's actually only at about 36, and there's a long way to go. So perhaps we should look at making that mandatory. Moving on to what we're doing in the greenhouse gas emission space to develop the Eco Switch app, we have an awesome team who have been working very, very hard to do all that nitty-gritty work that Craig mentioned. It's tough. So Ali Gaines there, you can see her picture. She has literally spent years of her life digging down into how many greenhouse gas emissions emerge from different kinds of food products. And she's got a team there, Tasman Davies, Carly Howes and Michaelis Hajiku with his team at Deakin, who have helped along that way to deliver the Eco Switch that you have today. Speaking of which, I'm going to hand over to Fraser to tell you all about it.
Thanks, Simone. Good morning, everybody. So better food choices for planet A. See what I did there? Yep. So healthy food, healthy planet, healthy people. We're all here because climate change is the greatest threat facing all of us. Also, 30 to 40% of human-caused greenhouse gases can be attributed directly to the global food system, and around 27,000 preventable deaths every year in Australia because of poor diet. So we can see that food is at the heart of these two big issues in terms of people's health and our own planetary health. The good news is that generally, healthier foods are better for the planet. There are some notable exceptions, unfortunately, but a really important report called the Eat Lancet Commission report that came out in 2019 stated food as the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. So this gives us hope that, and I guess real focus, that we should be looking at food to help not just human health, but also what goes on in the future health of our planet. So here's my best graphics for the day. So generally speaking, there's a growing awareness that meat is bad, beef is the worst for the planet. But what about the rest? Because that's not how generally I eat. I eat a lot of packaged foods. We're driven by convenience. We buy lots of foods from a supermarket. So what about the rest? Is a lasagna better or worse than pizza? But if I really want to buy a lasagna, is this lasagna better than that lasagna? So that's the problem we have, because here's my farting cow animation. But I was speaking to Michaelis, who's our LCA expert here. He says it's actually 90% burping. Yeah, it's not farting. So, but this is funnier, I think. So we're not sure. So people know about beef, don't eat beef, but what about the rest? And when consumers try and figure this out, if they're sufficiently invested in this space, confusion reigns. These are some of the claims that we find on our packs when we do our surveys every year in Food Switch. And there's not just these certified claims, but all of these manufacturer claims as well. So what does carbon friendly mean when it's on a pack? What does sustainable mean when a manufacturer writes that on their pack? So it doesn't give very good guidance to a consumer to make the right choice should they want to. So this is where we've kind of come in to the picture. But moving from a nutrition space and a health space into the planetary health space, we realize how complicated it is. It's a much tougher gig because you've got not just the climate change piece, but you've got land use, water scarcity, eutrophication, all of these different things that impact the overall climate, overall planet. So we've focused on the main thing first, which is climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, to make a start on it. And we've utilized the data that we already have through the Food Switch program, where we take data from a pack label and we put that into a database. So a lot of that data we've used to say, okay, can we do something with this data around planetary health and not just human health? And so we've taken things like the country of origin data that's now on pack, nutrients, ingredients, importantly. And we've combined these with what I call life cycle assessment data. So this is data that looks at an individual product, all of the inputs associated with that, and there may be many, and what are the resources and emissions associated with each of those inputs to get a cradle to grave view of that individual product. And that product might be a finished lasagna, pack of lasagna, or it might be a tomato. And then when we look at the different, contributions of the whole food system to the carbon emissions, we can see this picture. So generally speaking, there's about 18 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent generated by the food system. And this is the rough split. So we can see here that agriculture, the light green in the middle here, is about 8 billion. So it's the biggest part of the contribution of the overall life cycle. So that's where, again, we've decided to focus. We're looking at carbon and we're looking to the farm gate of the ingredients. And we've applied our expertise in nutrient profiling of foods, which Simone hinted at. And we've come up with a process to try and evaluate the carbon emissions associated with an individual food, because that's really what I think people need to make informed choices. There may be information out there right now that says, this category is worse than that category, but when you're out shopping and living your normal life, it's not that helpful in terms of making the right choices. So how this works, very briefly, is for a given food, and I've helped with the green squares, it's split into lots of different ingredients, several ingredients. And we've gone through the process of estimating the different proportion of each ingredient. So in a lasagna, my go-to product, it may contain 100 grams of tomatoes. We've also looked at the life cycle assessment data to produce a kilo of tomatoes. How much carbon dioxide does that take or produce? And then we've combined that with all of the different ingredients to end up with an overall carbon dioxide equivalent emissions associated with a total food product. And then finally, just to make it interesting, we've also looked at the NOVA classification, which tells you how processed a product is, from 1 minimally processed to 4 ultra processed. You might have heard that term used more. And they get a penalty for that. And then an additional penalty depending on its country of origin labeling. So if it's imported, it's going to get obviously dinged the most in terms of an additional penalty that goes on top of that gas. So we end up with an overall score for the greenhouse gases for a single item. And then we've developed a rating system, because putting up an actual kilos of carbon dioxide for a product isn't going to be meaningful to people. So just like the health star rating, we said we need to convert that to something that people can use and understand very quickly and implicitly. So we've created something that's very familiar to people. So a 5-star rating obviously reflects the health star rating that's already out there and people are getting used to. Could be better if it was mandatory. But as Simone said, our understanding also that color helps people's comprehension of this. So we've added a color basis to it. But Just in the health star rating, 5 stars is best, half a star is the worst for the planet. And then, ta-da, we've put all of these into the new EcoSwitch app, which is available to download right now. So you'll get a QR code at the end of the session, and you'll be able to do that. And we've got some products at the back of the room that you can have a play with. But how it works is that you scan a barcoded product, and for that individual item, you'll get a rating, half a star to 5 star, based on its greenhouse gas emission impact. You'll also see better choices for our planet. Bit of cropping going on there. So you'll see better choices for our planet. So this is the switch. So for every item you scan, it'll suggest products that are better for the planet below it. And then additionally, there's a new feature. If you press on any of those products, you can go deeper and you can see that these 3 screens on the right, you'll get a lot more rich information. So more sustainability information. So, any sustainability claims that are made, whether it's imported in its country of origin, but you also see health, nutrition information as well. So you'll actually see a health star rating and you'll see the nutrients displayed there as well. So if you are interested in the health of your family as well as the health of the planet, you will get that information in addition. And just to really close now, our vision, I think, is to create an environmental version of the health star rating for Australia. We want to have something that everybody can look at, understand, and use on an equal footing, and not be bombarded with the plethora of different claims from different manufacturers about how to assess a food. It needs to be science-based, and we want a single system for all retailers and all manufacturers to use. And ideally, it's government-backed. And potentially it could even go beyond food. But today, let's pick our battles and go for it. So I'm making an appeal today. We started this journey, but there's a long way to go. This data will be improved. The system will get better, but it'll only do that with better, more detailed data. So we need participation of the food industry to make this really robust and the most meaningful to consumers. And so I'm appealing to retailers, manufacturers that are out there that can help us on this journey and accelerate and perhaps become a foundation partner to move this forward and to become a real thing for Australia. And as Kermit the Frog once said, it's not easy being green, but we've got to do our best. Thank you.
Thank you, Fraser. Thanks to this app, though, it's easier to be green, so that's good. I don't know who said that, maybe Miss Piggy. It's great. I've actually had a good play around with it last night. It's really good. I must admit, one of the things I was thrilled about was the fact that you've put the health switch information in there as well. I was wondering whether you had to go between 2 apps to do it. But it's also very useful that seeing you put up there the number of claims and logos that have been put out there to be sustainable. I mean, that is the nightmare we're dealing with at the moment, is everyone comes up with their own system, their own claims, and it is super frustrating for a consumer to actually deal with that kind of stuff. And a lot of it is greenwashing, a lot of it is a real nightmare. And it's very, I think you literally use the words that I use about 3,000 times a year, which is, it could be better if it was mandatory. If we actually had a system whereby this kind of data, that, you have institute, like somebody like the George Institute, feeding the data in, and we had a compulsory program and we have that on our packaging, that is the solution we need. The current solution, which is non-mandatory, which is thousands of different people coming up with their own labels, is confusing as anything and just a bit of a nightmare. So look, it's great to see this kind of design, and it is a really good app too. Look, I just can tell you, it's not great news if you love Lurpak, I'll tell you that. It's killing the planet and me, apparently. But it is, I do also love it. I think one of the best things about this particular approach is actually that substitute thing. The fact that it doesn't just go, hey, this is bad, it shows you alternatives there. And that's what makes it super easy to use. And already I'm looking for, I haven't found any ones that have their claims being disputed, but I'm really excited about seeing that coming up as well. So yeah, and also I must admit, I hadn't, the level of processing, I hadn't seen the Nova thing before, but again, that's a great thing to actually deal with. And I've got lots of questions about this app. So we're actually going to do a bit of a panel. If all the panelists could come up here, we'll hopefully get our other panelists online as well. And I'll introduce the panelists as they come up. First up, we've got Fraser Taylor, who you just saw, specialist in data-driven health interventions, Managing Director of the Food Switch program at the George Institute for Global Health. And of course, the Food Switch app is not only award-winning, but it's also now seen in many other countries around the world as well. So it's great. We have Rebecca Gilling, who you will know Rebecca from all of her work at Planet Arc. She was the co-CEO since 2021, and since in 2023, she's the solo CEO. I believe it was bloodless, I'm not sure. Under Rebecca, Planet Arc is focused on 3 spheres of activity: carbon neutrality, circular economy, and connecting people with nature. Simone Pettigrew is the head of food policy at the George Institute for Global Health. She has qualifications in economics, marketing, consumer psychology, and she has a focus on the best way to provide nutrition and sustainability information to consumers, and has conducted research on this topic with more than 30,000 consumers in more than 20 countries. She just hassles people in the shops, I think. I'm not sure how she does it, but 30,000 people, a lot of people to talk to. And hopefully, let's see, by the magic of technology, no, maybe not, let's see. We also have joining us, where? Yes, she's joined. Do we have?
I am here. I don't know if you can hear.
We're just trying to deal with the tech aspect of this. But Catherine Bowen is an internationally recognised expert on the science and policy of sustainability, climate change and global health issues. And Catherine's both a director at the Melbourne Climate Futures and also a professor environment, climate and global health in the School of Population and Global Health, Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences. Her business card is at least 3 meters long. There you go. She's here. We're going to try and move her up to the top so we can see her. Yeah, there you are.
Should I say hello to test my sound? Yeah?
Your sound is good. It's a miracle.
Super. All right.
It's happening thanks to COVID. This is all working. Fraser, first quick question that came up from that discussion there, because you said you can use this to look at a tomato. Are you able to use this app on fresh foods? Does it has to be packaged goods? Where's the kind of line drawn there?
So yeah, it's on the barcode of food. So that's how our system works at the moment. We have discussed maybe using, a different process to try and look at just fresh foods, but it's difficult to identify them. You'd have to change. So that's the plan.
That's the next step. I was just thinking it might be the first time I'm really excited by fruit stickers, because I'm constantly battling against fruit stickers. But if they could link to your app, I'd be less annoyed. But it's a difficult thing. I mean, I do wonder, we are eating so much packaged food nowadays as well. I mean, could you feed information into this app as well to educate people about the other choices they're facing? What's the next step in terms of this app?
So the next step in terms of the app is just to make it better in terms of the data. I think what we really want is for the whole country and especially for industry to embrace it. And they're only going to get on board if they think that it's legit and it represents their products properly. And the same for consumers, that they've got to believe that the product that they're scanning, they're getting bona fide information on it. And they know that if it says it's better than that one, then that is true. So mostly it's about getting the data as accurate as possible.
And that's an interesting question, because getting data is a nightmare nowadays, and particularly getting data out of private companies. So for most of these things, if you're looking at some all brown or something, are you kind of applying the same life cycle assessment to the grains in all of the different products? Are you able to then adjust that to, one company that says, no, but hang on a second, we use super sustainable farming and this kind of thing? Are you being able to kind of feed that into it so you can actually show what's better?
So we can't at the moment, but that would be the plan. I mean, again, in terms of behavior change, we need to be able to give manufacturers and brand owners the opportunity to differentiate and distinguish what their product, and if they've got a superiority in sustainability, then they've got to be able to make that visible so people can choose that. If they're interested in it, then that's going to be a virtuous cycle. So again, that's something that we need to be able to do.
That's Catherine, I want to come to you briefly on that. You look at kind of environmental systems and this kind of stuff. Like, do you see a change in the way some people are using farming, that there are better practices coming through that hopefully can be reflected in this long term?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a really good question. And we're seeing an enormous interest and uptake in regenerative farming practices that I'm sure many people are aware of, happening in Australia and globally, and really learning from our Indigenous friends and colleagues in terms of how we're caring for our country. So, but it's a slow process, and that's one where we really are going to just need to think about how we learn, but also I think what I also wanted to say was the intergenerational issues around the way that we're developing these sorts of software and linking with our Indigenous knowledge, and also our intergenerational, so our younger people basically, and having their active involvement in these sorts of developments, because we know that they are really, really vital in terms of how we're going to proceed in the next, year and this critical decade. So, yeah, importantly, linking to our Indigenous friends and colleagues, but also to our younger populations who are just crucial in terms of developing these sorts of solutions. So it's not just us when we go to the supermarket as adults, it's how do we also educate our children? How do we support their understanding of where does food come from? It may not be just in the US where people think that pink, strawberry milk comes from pink cows. It's in many other places too, because we've become increasingly disconnected with our environment. So, there's some brief reflections from me on that.
Strawberry milk doesn't come from pink cows. So many learnings so far today. Presumably putting it into app form will help with education as well with that. I want to come to you, Rebecca. Planet Ark obviously has had an enormous role over years of trying to change people's behaviour, trying to change businesses' behaviour and governments, that kind of thing. How important is it to have this kind of data being brought together in a way that can then be presented to government or can present it to somebody? Like, what a difference does that kind of make?
Oh, look, it's hugely important. However,
try this one.
There you go. No,
oh, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Hugely important, obviously, that consumers have information that they can rely on. One of the issues that comes up is how reliable is the data? And what we've found in our work around the circular economy, for example, is we have a metrics working group as part of our Australian Circular Economy Hub, which is chaired by Heinz Schandl from CSIRO. And they've taken the view that we really need to start with the data we have. It may not be perfect, but it's got to be a starting point, and we know we've got to get moving. So let's start with the data we have. It will improve as we look more deeply into things, and one thing leads to another. So we're confident that if we get a start on, we will only see improvement.
And Planet Ark's been doing a lot of work in the packaging space and pushing for better packaging. I know that you're considering kind of trying to put packaging in there. Like, is there the kind of data out there where you think packaging could be fed into this kind of stuff?
Oh, look, I'm sure. Certainly, we along with the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, developed the Australasian Recycling Label, which we would love to see mandated as well, as I'm sure you would. That tells people what to do with each part of the packaging. But what is important, I think, and what is relevant here, is that it gives producers an opportunity to change the way they produce the packaging. Now, that's one element. So we know that about 80% of the environmental impact of any product is in the design phase, is locked in at the design phase. So that's a hugely important part of it. The other area that we're particularly interested in is food waste. And as I understand it, some of the work that's going to be done on sustainable packaging in this as part of EcoSwitch is to look at the way in which the packaging either enhances or deters from food waste, keeps food preserved for longer, or conversely is detrimental to preservation of food.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting area because, a lot of people hate plastic in food. Often plastic may actually, ironically, be the best thing to prevent food waste. It actually prolongs the life of the food. And this is why, because I know you're looking, Fraser, bringing in different aspects. So water use and all those kind of different aspects in there. Does it, Simone, I'll come to you from a kind of consumer behaviour perspective. Does this lead to confusion for people when you've got all these different aspects? It's like, hang on a second, what I mean? So plastic's good for this and that kind of thing. So will you try and bring in these other aspects and put them still into the 1-star rating, or are you going to have, you know, now Rebecca's putting on the recycling logo on the thing. We've got the health logo there. We're going to have our climate logo, our water logo, our packaging logo. You're just going to, Sultana brand will be written in 10-point text at the top by the time we get through all this. You know, how do you make it so that you can give as much information as possible, but not make it too complex for people?
Yes, and that's really one of the major objectives of the Centre of Research Excellence, is to look at that consumer psychology domain, because consumers have a right to know and we want to get that information to them, but information proliferation that isn't able to be understood is pointless. Perhaps we could look at plain packaging for junk food, and then there'll be tons of space to put these kinds of things on. And of course, the other aspect of it is that we want this information to be salient, and if it's on the back of the pack and you're ordering online, you can't see it. So if we're looking at a future where there's a health star rating on a pack, mandated, hopefully, a planetary health rating on the pack for the food, mandated, hopefully, and then also a food packaging sustainability, which Samadhi is working very hard on developing at the moment, if that could also be mandatory, we might have 3 indicators on that pack. But that has the potential to confuse. I remain optimistic, though. If you think about the amount of marketing information that they put on those packs, I think we can provide those 3 types of important information.
And as you say, those kind of stars and the colours and that actually make it quite simple there. Fraser, what is the next kind of aspect you want to bring into this environmental rating?
Yeah, so mentioned packaging. So the next step is, for us, as I said, at the moment, we're just about carbon to the farm gate. And there's lots that go beyond the farm gate, and there's lots of other indicators. The system that we're looking at as our next step really takes it all into account. So it's going to take in 14 different indicators in one go, and it's going to go all the way to the consumer. So the best data system in the world is actually developed by the French. It's called Agribelize, and we're going to use that as our start point and then adapt it for Australianness. Because, for example, French have got relatively good quality hydroelectric electricity production. Ours isn't so good. So we need to make some modifications for that data to be appropriate and relevant to us. But that's the next step for us. So suddenly we'll embrace all of these different elements in one fell swoop, but it's a bit of work.
Yeah, it's great though. And again, I'm glad you're doing the work, not me. Let's go back to that online question briefly, Simone, because it is a big problem. Like, have you guys looked at, is there a way that can I look up my Coles website through the George Institute and have a kind of a layering over the top that shows me these results? Like, have you looked at a way to try and get this information out there in the online shopping world?
We have been experimenting with that, and it's actually quite complicated because those websites change their coding very, very regularly. So we can create these overlays and they become redundant almost straight away. So it remains a big challenge for us. Again, we keep looking to our friends in government to say, look, you should be making them show this information in a way on, whether it's on the website or whether it's on the package, in some kind of format that is really clear and salient and not disguised on the back and horizontal.
How are our friends in government going with that?
Ooh, should I pass on that one? I'm sure some of our friends in government are online. And hello, and we are here to support you in everything you want to do, and we would like very much to provide you with as much data as possible so you can make evidence-informed decisions.
It is interesting because consumers definitely want this kind of stuff. Like, a clear thing on the packet is so much a better way of doing it. And I think people are confused. Like, I've so many people stop me in the streets literally with confusion about, hang on a second, should I be buying this? Where do I put this? Simple solutions is what we really need from this. Catherine, I want to come to you quickly. I know you look at kind of the education of the kids and different stuff like that. What is it that, do we know what best does, what education does change people's behaviour and lead to change in this kind of area? Like, what kind of tends to get through to people? Is it that they just don't have the information in the first place, or is it that it has to be served to them in a particular way to actually change their behaviours?
Well, my training in psychology is a long, long time ago, but I think fundamentally we still need to remember that research does show that if you are exposed to our environment regularly as a young person, so you go on camping trips and you go on bushwalks and you're really connected with the environment, then you tend to respect the environment in a stronger way as an adult. And so it's even just those basic things like taking our children out for walks on the weekends and talking about plants and talking about, trees and spotting different birds, and just really supporting our children to become really much more aware of nature being all around us. And we are part of nature. Humans are intricately as part of nature. We're not separate from nature. So, and we know that sort of connection does flow on into action as an adult, whether that's in terms of power to make decisions around purchasing, or whether that's in terms of advocacy that people might take up. So I think that if we just we're all the way back to sort of first principles and really encouraging younger folk to spend more time in nature. I think that's something that we tend to overlook, and I think particularly, there's so much focus on devices and so on that we do become very removed from our natural environment. So that I think that's a absolutely vital thing for us all to think about how we can do that in a stronger way. And I think also we see. Sorry.
Continue.
I was just going to mention the Stephanie Alexander's example of kitchen gardens at schools as well, and we can see the incredible strength that those sorts of programs have. But they need funding, and they need to have really strong, federal and state and territory support in terms of implementing them in every school. Or some variety of that, because we can see how that changes students. Even at my girls' primary school, where I'm from in Melbourne, you can see that they understand where food comes from, and they understand the importance of fresh, unprocessed food in terms of both the benefits for their health and also the benefits of, the environment as well, and the carbon footprint and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so totally. It's true that also getting kids to engage with making food often leads to less food waste as well, which is great. So obviously engaging with nature, that means, Rebecca, that your approach of trying to get Planet Ark people out into nature more is the right approach there. In terms of the community of Planet Ark, you've got this really engaged group of people. You've got people who really care about these kind of issues. How much does food come up when people are thinking about climate and solutions, that kind of stuff? Is that something do people ask you about this? Is this something that's an interest a lot?
Look, I think people are only just starting to be aware of the impact that the whole food system has on the environment, and particularly around food waste. I mean, you made the point that the food system accounts for a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, 30 to 40%. Food waste accounts for about 6% of that, and globally about a third of the food that is produced is actually wasted or lost. So that is a huge issue, and where it pains, particularly with National Recycling Week coming up next week, to give people those messages. But in terms of what we've found about what are the prompts that make people change their behaviours, we've asked people where they go to for environmental information, and they go to trusted sources like the George Institute, like Planet Ark, that they perceive to be independent, but they also rely very much on peers. And so what's hugely important, we believe, is to create new social norms. That is one way to really not just give people information, which we know is somewhat effective, but not finally what's going to change behaviour. So it is what we do and say in our communities, the information that we share within our families and amongst our peers.
Fraser, do you think that's the new step you can put in there to stop food waste? That can say, you've already got this, or are you sure you're going to have you sure you need a box this big? It's tough. It's a tough one to deal with that particular perspective there. In terms of, I think it's great to look at the greenhouse gases, and it's really clear. And it's, as I said, it's something that totally confuses people. What do you think are the main other environmental impacts that you really want to feed in there, that you really want to educate people? Like, will you be able, once you put in other factors there, will I be able to click on the stars and say, you know, it's really bad on climate, but it's great on water, that kind of stuff? Will you be able to break it down further?
I think we'll be able to break it down in the back end, if you like, and get that data if it's going to be helpful for us collectively to do something about it. I don't think it's particularly going to be helpful at a consumer level. And again, I think simplification and just making it straightforward, people to make quick choices is probably the best thing we can do. As you said, I think although packaging isn't really the biggest thing in terms of, you know, the other indicators of planetary health, it's one of the most visible. And so I think perhaps making that differently visible or separately visible might be something that we want to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, you know, as I said, if you were to feed packaging in merely at the carbon level, you'd probably see a very different result than if you fed in packaging at a waste level or something else as well. So it's going to be a difficult one to deal with.
It is, and it's one of the most visible things that a brand owner can do to differentiate and improve the impact of their products. And so they want that to be visible, I think, to people in much of the ways. The recycling information that's already on pack helps, but take that to the next level.
Your experience from doing the Health Switch app, do you get a lot of pushback from business about it? Do they kind of come back to you and say, hang on a second, you're saying our product's bad, we're saying it's much better, you haven't taken this consideration, or do they kind of let you go? Like, and do you expect, I guess, more engagement on this?
So we expect more engagement on this. I think in the nutrition space, it's pretty clear, and there's less ambiguity in the data, and we don't get much pushback. It's science-based. We want this to be science-based, but because there are a lot more moving parts, and because of that data isn't publicly available as it is in terms of the nutrition information that we get on a label, then it gets a bit murkier. And there are some big stakes involved in terms of stakes. That's probably a slip there, but, you know, some vested industries that are going to find this change really challenging for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Simone, what extent do you see this kind of data and this app as, you know, not just something that's useful for me to take to the supermarket and look for myself, but then for you to kind of use for advocacy and for pushing for change, either with, I guess, the manufacturers themselves or with government? Like, how much does that feed into that?
Oh, that's hugely part of our plan. So similarly, like we do with the Health Star rating and the Food Switch app, it's got those two dimensions, the upstream and downstream. It's definitely there as a consumer tool, but probably even more importantly, it's there for us to aggregate data at the market level to be able to report that information to government so they can see the state of the food supply, hence the name of the report. And that enables them to see where the problem areas are. And similarly, with this planetary health data that we're generating, we'll be able to see which organizations, which retailers are the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the country. And then that becomes a real reformulation or redevelopment motivation.
I'm going to come to anyone on this. I'm not sure who's the best person to answer this necessarily, but there's obviously, you know, there's been a big push for a long time to change our food, the way we eat food. There's been a big push from a health perspective and a climate perspective to say we should be eating more vegetables, we should be eating more fruit, we should be eating less meat, that kind of thing. The last time I did a dive into the data, it was extraordinary how slow that change was. I guess let's come to you first, Simone, on that consumer psychology perspective. Why are people so slow to change on this front? You know, it was better for the planet, better for health, cheaper. Even last week showed that eating a healthy diet is cheaper as well. Why do we not do it?
Yeah, so when you're choosing food, taste is the number one decision criterion. So if you want people to move, you have to convince them that taste is at least equal, if not better, than the alternative that they're already consuming. So that makes it a little bit tough because taste is something that you grow into and you've developed over time. It's not something that changes pretty quickly. Having said that, if you look at the extent to which non-nutritive sweeteners or artificial sweeteners have permeated our food supply, it goes to show you can move people's tastes along pretty quickly. So we're hoping that by giving people alternatives, prompting them to try some different alternatives, that they might be able to overcome that taste threshold. And then the second most dominant choice criterion is price. So the thing here will be making sure that there is enough motivation amongst producers to really look at their practices and how they're producing their foods, to look for ways that they can cost effectively, but most importantly, greenhouse gas effectively, change their production processes to improve their score.
And Simone, is it worth mentioning the Australian dietary guidelines? And
yeah, good point. So the Australian dietary guidelines are currently under review at the moment. And by and large, we're very big supporters of the dietary guidelines, but we do have that little interesting issue there where lean meats are advocated within the guidelines, but we know from a planetary health point of view, not so good. So that's going to be a tension. And at the moment, when they're investigating the guidelines review, it's mainly focusing on the nutritional side of things. They haven't quite gotten there yet to thinking about the planetary side of things. So we would really like to encourage them, particularly now that we can provide data on this, to also include review of the planetary health outcomes of the foods to determine what those guidelines should be in the future.
And Fraser, is that the example that you were talking about when you said, normally what's better for you health-wise is also better for the planet? Is that the kind of example? Are there any other examples where that kind of doesn't match up?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So lean meat is the best one because that's the worst for the planet, but it's also relatively good for health. Chocolates are going to be an interesting one as well because it's surprisingly it's relatively high impact in terms of planetary health, but it's another thing that people are very vested in its enjoyment and taste.
It's interesting. You're saying chocolate doesn't have a large carbon footprint.
No, it does.
It does have a large carbon. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Because it's also not necessarily the greatest health thing as well. Just sticking on that meat thing, because there's obviously been a lot of research going on, the CSIRO and others, and there's Asparagopsis, the seaweed that supposedly will get rid of all the methane from cattle. That's been, I think, sea forest down in Tasmania now, trying to put that into a commercial level. There's a lot of people trying to put it into commercial level. Are we any closer to really having zero carbon beef? Rebecca or Catherine, anyone who's got any insight into this? Does anyone know if it's coming?
So I think, again, I was speaking to Michaelis just before the meeting that you can give ruminant supplements to reduce their burping and their fermentation. So I think there are technical solutions to some of this. It won't go all the way, but definitely, people are working hard on this. So there's room for optimism and not depression.
And if I could also add, I think we've all seen at the supermarket level the increasing variety of options available for plant-based meat alternatives. And while the uptake is slow to start, I think it will increase over time, partly because people are starting to understand the health implications of eating too much meat, but also that sense in which the environmental impact is significant as well. I think one of the important things about the work that's being done here, particularly on packaged foods, is the fact that we are so time poor that this is one of the contributors to food waste, unfortunately, is that, and it comes back to the health guidelines. We're told to eat 5 servings of vegetables and 2 servings of fruit a day. And I think we go shopping with the best of intentions to feed ourselves and our family along those lines, and then find that we're so time poor that we end up at the end of the week with a vegetable bin full of stuff that's looking pretty limp, and it ends up in the bin. And so getting good quality packaged food that is nutritional, that is comparing the climate impacts and giving that people the information where they're most likely to need it, either in their hand, on their device, or on the package itself, is really going to be a game changer.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's interesting how, we've a couple of times we've talked about taste being the issue. I remember I did a foreign correspondent story in America looking at meat alternatives. We tried some lab-grown meat, but also then vegetable alternatives. And it was fascinating that if they didn't get that taste right and the texture right, and that, it just did not take off at all. It's just, it just dies. You saw products that were, some of them were getting quite good and we're going to, have actually made a bit of a dent. But, are people going to listen to these apps? Like, is it in the end, people are just looking for taste?
But we know how important taste is.
Yeah. So perhaps a focus there can be on consumer segmentation. So everyone's a little bit different, and we get these clusters of different kinds of consumers, and that environmentally conscious cluster is growing. So they are the group who are probably likely to forsake some taste for environmental improvement. So we might have to just focus on those leaders, get them out there, make sure they're aware of what they can buy. They become those leaders in the adoption curve. Other people get exposed to their behaviors, hopefully a improvement all round eventually.
Just get influencers to do it, hey? TikTokers. Any TikTokers in the room? You going to say, Brad?
Well, so I was going to say also that, there's no need that, a version of a food in a category, again, lasagna, needn't be tastier and better for the environment.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing is the comparisons you're doing in it. It's just like, it's interesting to go, oh, I'm eating this muesli bar that's worse for me and worse for the environment, but there's a totally an alternative here that I can actually go to. And again, I think that's what's really powerful and simple for this. Catherine, and you look at kind of food systems, you're looking at climate solutions there. What do you think are the big changes that we need to make in the food space?
Well, you know what? I mean, this has been so interesting listening to this. And what we haven't really talked about yet is cost. So I know you've mentioned it a little bit, Craig, but I had a quick scan, downloaded the app. I'm in the office. Sometimes I have an emergency packet of oats because I haven't managed to have breakfast in the morning. I just scanned that, said they were pretty good, but gave me the option of some organic ones as well, which I would say would be at least 50% more expensive. So I think the issue of cost is really, really important here to start to think about, because I can afford those. That's fine. I was just grabbed something when I needed it for the office. But I think that we haven't really talked about the cost, and the comment around segmenting of the market's really important in that regard as well, because we're going to see people that are really looking at cost in terms of how that dictating their purchasing choices. So
yeah,
I think that's just something that'd be good to have a discussion about too.
It's very good. I can imagine that if you try to feed cost into this, it changes every second, basically, across everything. Interesting, though. Interesting question you're bringing up, the organic alternative there. When you're just doing this particular study, it's just looking at carbon emissions. How does organic food go? Does it get better or worse?
So I should have given you a Dorothy Dixon instead of this one. I don't know. I think it's an overlay that, and maybe I'll wheel Michaelis into this. I don't know, but I don't think there's a generally well accepted change in terms of the carbon emissions associated with organic.
The only reason I ask is that organic food tends to use more land. It doesn't have as high yield, so it's not one of those things where organic food is necessarily an environmental advantage. I'm often interested by people can make organic food choices for health reasons sometimes. There's obviously benefits in terms of using less chemicals and all those other things, but there's been studies that suggest if we try to grow everything organically around the world, we're going to have to pretty much triple our land use. And it's not necessarily lay down a environmentally beneficial thing. So it's interesting how that kind of thing gets reflected in this.
Yeah, and so it becomes different if it's which indicator you're talking about.
Yeah.
So at the carbon level, it probably doesn't make too much difference, but when you get into pesticides use, land use, that kind of thing, maybe it becomes more important.
We were talking earlier on about how that, some of the foods that probably have an environmentally smaller footprint are going to be grown in giant vats in cities. And that we're not necessarily going to like that. We kind of want the idea of, oh, this is grown on a beautiful farm and it's been brought up, that kind of thing. So do you think consumers are ready for that kind of change, Simone?
I think ignorance is bliss sometimes for consumers.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, you get kids that think that meat is grown on a plastic tray and they don't even realize it comes from a creature that walked around a paddock. I suspect they're not thinking about it that hard enough to be concerned about that back point.
And I think that's already happening. I mean, the Netherlands is one of the largest food producers in the world, and it's almost entirely done under glass. And virtually all of our tomatoes now are coming from glass houses. Yeah, I remember the shock my son had when he realised that the fish he was eating and the fish in the sea were the same thing. He was mystified. I'm going to open up for questions in the audience. I presume, do we have online questions as well coming in through? Okay, cool. Let's go to some questions in the audience here. Lots of good hands going up. Here you go. This lady here, then we'll come to this gentleman here.
we'll go into. Hi, I'm Kathy Lamakia. I'm from the Grains and Legumes Nutrition Council. I've spent the last 15 years in the Netherlands, so what you're talking about has been my world. We at the Grains and Legumes Council, we collect a lot of data, category audits all the time. So we see the same issues you do, which is a lot of sustainability terms being used, but they're all referring to different things, which can be misleading for consumers. I'm just wondering, in your particular analysis, the way you're going to calculate is really looking at carbon emissions, and it's really only to farm gate. I represent an industry that goes from the farm right through to consumer. Have you explored any of the other systems from the Netherlands, from Europe, EcoScore and some of the others? I know they're a lot more complex to calculate, but I'm just wondering for transparency to a consumer, especially when you're going to be talking about switching from one product or another when you're measuring one attribute.
So happily, indeed we are. So that is the next step that I talked about. So EcoScore in Europe is based on this French system called Agribelize. So that's the one we're going to adopt because it has a really wide acceptance. It's very detailed. So yes, in that respect, we will be using that, and we will start getting these other indicators, and we'll be going beyond the farm gate right to the consumer.
Hello, my name's Nicole Senior, and I am a freelance dietitian with a very strong interest in healthy and sustainable food systems. I want to acknowledge the work that's gone on in this area, because I think what's happened up until now is that people have been talking the talk but not walking the walk when it comes to sustainable and healthy food choices. And I think that's because they've been unable to make choices. And the whole discourse has been really overtaken by, I would say, global narratives, which can be a bit iffy on the evidence side. So it's great to see this work. My question relates to the data underpinning the carbon emissions. So we know that carbon emissions can change according to where a food is produced. And in a way, we have to think global but act local. And I think that goes also for data. And I wonder, we've been talking a lot about meat and how that's a high emissions food, yet in Australia, our industry has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2030, and sheep meat already is carbon neutral right now. So I wonder, in your search through the data, have you been able to use local data, or have you had to use international data? And how much of a difference do you think that's made?
So I think, again, that's for me. So we've used a combination. So we started out with global data, and just recently, and the data that's in the app now, every instance we could, we've used Australian data versions of those LCAs. So for beef, we've used an Australian LCA. Yeah.
So I don't know if there's an example of lamb being carbon neutral, but I don't think all lamb is carbon neutral in Australia.
Sheep meat is currently climate neutral. It's one of the few climate neutral foods in the Australian diet. That's CSIRO research.
Definitely want to see that report. Deeply skeptical. Anyway, next question over here.
So lots of questions in the online chat. Everyone's very excited. Christina Cleghorn says, it seems the app isn't available in New Zealand. Is that right?
Yeah, so the app's just in Australia for the time being. We do have data on other markets, but we're going to do a good job on Australia first, I think, is the way we need to do this. And then once we've done that, maybe we expand. But at the moment, I want to be really focused on Australia and getting as good a job done here as possible.
A couple more questions. Some concerns about the data integrity, but lots of excitement to incorporate more sustainability indicators. Adrian Cameron asks, how far away do you see those steps to integrate the elements of sustainability into the algorithm and the app?
Sooner the better. I think everybody would agree with that, but there's a lot of work involved. I think this comes back to my appeal to partners or foundational partners to help us accelerate that. You know, if we have the resources, I think we could go to the next level on this within the next 6 months, 3 to 6 months. Without it, we might take longer than that, but it's going to take a fair bit of investment and time to do that, but it's possible.
It is interesting, though, that at the climate conference, there was a similar debate between scientists over we're going, do we wait till we've got the perfect data, or do we have to go out with what we've got now? And I think given the speed at which the challenge we're facing, we have to go out with it now. And also, it's much more likely that, you know, the Legumes Council will engage with you and get better data or whatever as soon as it's actually out there and can be improved. So I think it's great to see that.
Some more questions. Do we know what percentage of people are interested in purchasing environmentally friendly foods? What portion of the segment do they form and could potentially be interested in this app?
No, unfortunately. That could be out there. I'll take that one on notice.
Rebecca might have a bit of insight on that.
I could just give you a bit of tangential information coming from LOHAS, Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability, which maps consumer choices around health and sustainability, and they show a graph of leaders, leaners, learners, and laggards, and they identify about 10% who are the leaders, then about 35% on either side who are the leaners and learners, and the laggards, the final 10%, you might as well forget about them because they're the climate deniers, the people that we're simply not worrying about.
But it's interesting on that question again, because when you don't have an easy option to implement it, it's less likely it's going to happen. So, you know, having these kind of apps to actually make it, once people will go, oh, I use this app, it becomes easy. That's when you that social pressure builds up and more people do it.
And just a plug for the work we'll be doing as part of the Centre of Research Excellence, we've got some large-scale consumer surveys scheduled where we'll be looking at the trade-offs that people make. So you might have a proportion of people who say, yes, I'm environmentally concerned, but as soon as they have to actually choose a different product from their favourite, then that commitment might change. If they have to pay more for it, it might change as well. And if also the healthiness contradicts the planetary score, then they will also rethink. So we're going to be looking at all those different trade-offs.
It's an interesting area where you go, when we talked about the costs being brought up there, where again, this is where maybe government can play a little bit of a role. It always frustrates the hell out of me, and I'm sure Rebecca as well, when you go, hang on a second, so the most environmentally friendly option here is the most expensive one. How do we keep ending up in that position? Because cost is a huge driver of this. So that's where you kind of go to government, hey, look, you know, if you were to tax this little bit or you know, incentivize this particular thing, then the environmentally friendly option would be the cheaper option. And I think that then leads to broader change, because what you ideally want is the bigger question I'm always asking is, how do you change the behavior of those that don't care? And maybe we could feed that into this kind of thing, and then you can actually get the cost to change and go in that way as well. That's probably a statement for me. To question up the back here, and then we'll come back to you again if you want.
Thank you very much, Jane Hurst from George Institute UK. Brilliant product. I'm just wondering, most of the examples you've given are land-based examples. I'm just wondering about our oceans and sustainability in the oceans, thinking specifically about things like trawler fishing and fish that are fished on the other side of the world and travel here. I'm just wondering if in your app currently or in iterations in the future, whether that will also be considered. And I guess that brings in sort of animal welfare and things as well. So a lot of those ticks and green leaves and stuff you showed are often around animal welfare as one aspect of environmental sustainability beyond carbon footprint.
Yes. So again, it's a very complicated space, and I think again, the next step that we get to will then start to incorporate additional indicators like that. I don't know if sea-based foods, fish get a bit of a free kick when it comes to carbon, because a lot of aspects of farming doesn't come into trawling fish. So I'm not sure is the honest answer on that, but
I scanned some tuna last night, and that was I think it was about 3.5 stars. So it was not too bad, but not too good. The tuna I had was one of the worst ones, apparently. So there you go. It's already changing behaviours. Yeah, but it's interesting, as you say, you bring animal welfare into that again. That's another aspect. Do you put animal welfare in when you're doing an environmental footprint program? It's
A nice to have, I would have thought.
Yeah, where do you stop?
yeah, well, that's actually the question for you going forward. Is it's like you've got to kind of draw a line at some point and go. I mean, I guess the question for me would be: do you look at it and go, what has the biggest negative impact globally, environmentally going forward? They're the kind of ones we're going to look at.
Yeah, and the European community have started to define what they see as the key indicators to, planetary health and environmental sustainability. So they're kind of defining that, and maybe that'll be the list and where we end that list going forward. Again, because the data system that we're going to adopt is going to be based on that.
Yep.
So maybe we've got a self-defined line there.
Yep. As long as you're up front, Krishna. You can ask questions. So we'll come back to the ladies. She's okay. Or the other way.
Thank you. Sorry, it's Kathy again from Grains and Legumes. I'm just intrigued about the link to ultra processing, especially when we're talking about environmental, and at the moment you're only measuring greenhouse gases. So I'm sure it's a question most food industry will ask.
To me again. So we're using ultra processing kind of as an indicator or a proxy for the level of manufacturing, and so to provide malice points for that. So if something is ultra processed, then it's likely to have gone through a more rigorous manufacturing or processing stage, and therefore consume more water, more electricity, etc. So that's how we're using the ultra processing indicator.
And I think in terms of the consumer, another piece of research I think that is applicable here is the work done by Michael Pollan some years ago, American researcher who was interested in the number of different ingredients in packaged goods. His maxim was eat food as opposed to edible food-like substances, not too much, mostly plants. And I think if consumers got into the habit of looking at the ingredient list of packaged goods, it would help them make better environmental and health choices as well.
And I guess, Fraser, just to go on that processing front, so if a company was to say to you, well, hang on, we use 100% renewable energy for all of our processing, all of our plants, that then would feed into, I guess, taking out that extra bit on the processing front. Is that the kind of thing you're looking at doing?
So, I mean, there's other aspects that go into processing, so water use and things like, as well as electricity. But I think, again, the more accurate we can, if we can provide a system that allows a brand or a manufacturer to modify their scores based on the real way that they produce it, then that's going to be better for everybody. And it incentivizes industry to do the right thing if they're going to get the credit for it.
Yeah, totally, exactly. I think we have another question here in the audience.
My name is Michalis Hajigagu. I'm from Deakin University. I've also been involved. So I'm, talking. I just wanted to weigh in on a couple of things that we've been discussing.
Right. You're the life cycle expert. I love life cycle analysis. I spent too much of my life reading them though. How did this happen? Continue.
So I guess there's been a couple of discussions around, I think you mentioned the trade-off between going with something that's not complete in terms of coverage of indicators, etc. And that's an eternal dilemma that we have. There's also, you could include welfare as well. You can have a social LCA as well. You can have economic, social elements into your mix. The big question then becomes, regionalization, like a question previously about either organic or specific solutions that a certain manufacturer or producer might be applying. There's a lot of nuance and layers of nuance you can go into, but that, as Fraser keeps saying, it requires us to have that information about the specific product. At the moment, what we're producing is sort of averages based on the best estimates we have for a certain farming system.
I was just going to ask you a question on that front, because, as I said, when we were looking into carbon footprint of food, I was amazed at the extent to which life cycle assessments could show hugely different sways over the exact same product. Are you taking those and finding a median, an average? Like, what's the approach you take when you have this real swathe of data there?
Precisely. So the best way to do it in principle, and this is what we're doing in some current work that we're preparing for publication, is you sample across using uncertainty analysis, and you consider where the distribution of those values, and then you're adding up that uncertainty say if you've got lasagna and you've got uncertainty on the tomatoes, you've got uncertainty on the beef, on the cheese, that propagates, and then the final product also has an uncertainty. So ideally, you take a median or an average, but you also present that uncertainty. Now, again, that's overwhelming information potentially for a consumer. So, you're presenting an average figure there, but behind it, you do have the confidence and that rigor of knowing what's happening in that distribution. And certain products can have very, as you said, very heterogeneous values depending on their production system. And I think to add to that quickly, for some products where your farming stage has a low impact, a good example is potatoes. Your packaging and even the way you decide to cook them might make a big difference in your final footprint because of that. And I think that was mentioned before. And that's what something like considering the whole life cycle is important. Yes, it might not matter for beef very much because most of the emissions are happening on the farm. But for other products, distinguishing between the different available products requires knowing a lot about those other supply chain stages.
Yeah, I think it's spot on. It's interesting once you start getting into those kind of vegetables and really low carbon footprint stuff, transport starts to be a much bigger part of it and actually starts to make a greater relevance because otherwise. So I think we had a question at the back here. Maybe last question that we're going to, Simone's going to wrap up. We're going to have a little bit of wrap up. We'll all be around. There'll be more questions to ask.
For a really interesting discussion and presentation. I just had a question. I've got children, so I'm wondering about how this app could be put onto their phones and what happens to Pest to Power, and could they instead, if they want that packet of chips, you say, well, what about the planet, and get them to look it up. But I mean, Craig, you were talking about TikTok jokingly, but yeah, how can we get children involved in this and work from the ground up?
So I understand that Food Switch is sometimes used in schools for education around nutrition. I would love to see this used and incorporated into kids' education to start to get a growing awareness of the different impacts of foods.
And it's certainly something that could be incorporated in the work that we do with schools to encourage, across waste and recycling, but also about emissions in food.
I will say there hasn't been a lot of gamification in it though. Like it would be good if you could get points, because I pestered my parents into a better one. You get 10 points, this kind of stuff. It's difficult. It's got to find that nice balance between gamification and not making it like a gambling app, which is difficult for the George Institute to be involved in. But yeah, look, I think it'd be more fun next time. Can't phrase that. I want some music when I open it up. No, but thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panel and for all of the great questions that have come here today. It's obviously really exciting to have this launched and a lot of development coming as well, which is also really exciting to see that. So thank you to our panel. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. I'll throw back to you, Simone. Cheers. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you very much for that, Greg. I think
Yeah, here you go.
Thank you very much. Cheers. That was fantastic, Craig. You managed to keep us on our toes the whole time and think around all the issues. And you've obviously got a great deal of knowledge in there as well in this space, which, as we've been discussing, is not easy. It's actually really, really complicated. So I'm here for a bit of a call to action. Hopefully by the time you leave today, most of you, if not all, have downloaded the EcoSwitch app onto your phone. You hopefully will then go out and talk about it to everybody you know and suggest very strongly that all your friends and family download it and report back to you on the greenhouse gas emissions of the products that they're purchasing. In the bigger picture, we do need help in disseminating the app. We're a research institute. Our funds go to research, not to advertising. So the more that everyone in this room and beyond, again, our 300 people online can help us to disseminate the app would be fantastic. We're here, we're ready, we're willing, we're able to work with industry and government in terms of the data that we're collecting and what it means for the environment and what all the different stakeholders can do to try and improve outcomes. And as we've been saying, watch this space, is going to get better. We're going to be adding in those other environmental indicators over time. And again, reaching out to collaborators to assist us with that process. And we'll be moving into the packaging space as well to provide information to consumers about sustainability of the packaging on the food items that they're using. Thank you all very much. I'm going to hand over to Bruce for a wrap up.
Yeah, so it really just remains for me to close the session. First of all, thanks to Craig. I mean, that was tremendous, Craig. It's you know, it's a real pleasure being at the Institute with the quality of people that we're able to get to come here and talk with us, share their experiences, and you're right at the top of that list. So thanks very much indeed, and congratulations on the amazing work you're doing. It really is absolutely vital to all of our futures, and we are deeply appreciative. I'm not going to try and summarize all of that. I think there was a lot came out of it. I do reflect back to when we first launched Food Switch. I have an interesting little pest to power thing. The first thing my daughter did was she went and scanned gum, which got a 5-star, and so she went, "Dad, I can have as much gum as I want." I don't know if it still does, but so you know, there can be some downsides, but we did really well with Food Switch when we launched Food Switch. It was a different space. It was a different time. I reckon the App Store was probably a 50th of the size that it currently is, but it did give us great visibility, and it gave us a great opportunity to promote a really important issue. Paradoxically, we soon found out that actually the real value of Food Switch was in the data and how we could use that with the rest of the system to try and leverage. And I think this is going to be a great tool for getting messages out there, raising profile of the issue, getting it onto the agenda of some people who haven't got it on their agenda already. But again, I'm really emphasized to the team the importance of thinking right from the get-go how we leverage this data into the system, and I know that is already a core part of it. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks again, everyone, for coming in person. Thanks, everyone, for joining online, and particular thanks again to Craig and the panel. Have a great day.